She had everything, the voice that made grown men cry.
We'll always love you.
7 number 1 hits in a row, more than the Beatles. Movies, millions. That national anthem at the Super Bowl that still gives you chills.
And sung by Grammy Award winner Whitney Houston.
Whitney Houston was untouchable. But here's what they never told you. The same year she sang "I Will Always Love You" to the entire world, she was locking herself in her bedroom for days, destroying herself in ways nobody could see. Her mother would bang on the door, begging. Her daughter would cry outside. And Whitney was already gone. She just hadn't stopped breathing yet. By the time they found her in that hotel bathtub, she'd been drowning for 20 years. The water was just the final minute. And 3 years later, when her daughter died the exact same way, in the exact same position, we finally understood the truth. This wasn't just Whitney's story. This was a warning about what happens when you become everything to everyone except yourself. Whitney Elizabeth Houston grew up in New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, where her mother, Sissy Houston, directed the choir. Sissy wasn't just any gospel singer. She'd backed up Aretha Franklin, who became Whitney's honorary aunt.
She was able to be around, the stars of gospel and R&B. People like Aretha Franklin was, kind of a godmother figure.
Cousin Dionne Warwick was already an R&B legend. This wasn't a family that sang. This was musical royalty preparing its next queen. Young Whitney would stand before the congregation, all knobby knees and enormous eyes, and something supernatural would pour out.
Church was her first audience. That's where she was able to realize that she could move people with that powerful, soulful voice.
3 octaves of pure power wrapped in gospel's emotional truth. Her mother taught her that singing was ministry, that your gift belonged to God first and the people second. That lesson would haunt Whitney for the rest of her life. As a teenager, Whitney started recording background vocals, including on Chaka Khan's Clouds in 1980, while also performing in nightclubs with her mother. The modeling agencies noticed her first. Those cheekbones, that face, that smile that seemed built for magazines. But Whitney's focus was never the runway. She wanted the microphone, needed the stage. Singing was the only time she felt completely herself. Then came the night that changed everything. 1983, a New York club called Sweetwater's. 19-year-old Whitney sang to a small crowd. Clive Davis walked in, listened for a minute, and knew. He had built legends before. He heard another one rising. He moved quickly and signed her to Arista Records that spring. No waiting on months of debate. He saw what the world would soon see, a voice that crossed every boundary and spoke to anyone, a voice that could belong to everyone. Whitney believed she could carry that church fire into the wider world. She thought fame meant spreading love further. She did not yet see how universal love can turn a person into public property. A calling can become a cage when too many hands hold the key. The pews had told her to serve. The charts would demand even more. They would ask for the person herself. The transformation began immediately. Clive Davis didn't just sign Whitney Houston, he architected her. Every song choice, every photo shoot, every interview was calibrated for maximum reach. Songs that sounded too much like her church roots? Shelved. Music videos needed dancers of every color, carefully balanced, nothing too black, nothing too white. Whitney Houston would be everybody's singer. Her 1985 debut album did what no one expected. You Give Good Love reached number 1 on the R&B chart and climbed to number 3 on the Hot 100. Then came Saving All My Love for You, How Will I Know, and Greatest Love of All chart toppers. 3 Hot 100 number 1 singles from a debut was unheard of. The album sold 12 million copies, and Whitney was 22 years old. Then came the second album in 1987. She became the first woman to debut at number 1 on the Billboard chart. The run turned historic. 7 consecutive number 1 hit, breaking the Beatles' record. I Want to Dance with Somebody, played at every party and wedding. Joy wore her voice like a banner. January 1991 brought a new kind of moment. The nation was at war in the Gulf. In Tampa, she walked onto a football field and sang the anthem with a steadiness that felt like a hand on the country's shoulder. That performance echoed far beyond the stadium, replayed in living rooms, classrooms, and airports whenever people needed to feel united. Whitney Houston had become America's voice. By 1992, she'd conquered music so completely that movies seemed the logical next step. The Bodyguard should have been a small romantic thriller. Instead, it grossed over $400 million worldwide. The soundtrack became the best-selling soundtrack ever. I Will Always Love You spent 14 weeks at #1. Whitney Houston wasn't just a singer anymore. She was a phenomenon. Her version of Greatest Love of All became an anthem of self-empowerment, played at graduations and celebrations worldwide. The lyrics promised that learning to love yourself was the greatest love of all. Millions sang along, finding strength in Whitney's voice. Nobody knew that the woman singing those words was beginning to hate everything about herself. March 1989, the Soul Train Music Awards. Whitney walked on stage to accept an honor, and parts of the audience booed. They booed because she wasn't real R&B anymore. Whitney Houston, some said. The wound went deep. Friends said that night stayed with her. Whitney stood at that microphone, smiling because that's what she'd been trained to do, while her own community rejected her. Friends later said she never recovered from that night. She'd given up everything to be loved by everyone, and the people she'd started with, the people from her church world, her gospel world, were telling her she'd sold out. The booing represented something deeper than musical criticism. It was about identity, authenticity, and belonging. Whitney had been engineered to appeal to Middle America, and it worked. But success came with a cost she hadn't anticipated: being too black for pop audiences, who saw her as a crossover, and too pop for black audiences, who saw her as abandoning her roots. Another strain lived under lock and key. Robin Crawford, her closest friend from her teens. They'd met at a summer camp in New Jersey, and Robin became Whitney's everything: assistant, confidant, protector. As the career rose, Whitney ended the romantic side. She handed Robin a Bible and said the risk was too great. In that era, being anything other than straight would have ended her crossover appeal instantly. So Whitney chose the career. She chose the image. She chose to be who America needed her to be. The weight of maintaining perfection was crushing her. After performances where thousands screamed her name, Whitney would return to hotel rooms alone. After interviews where she smiled, laughed, and charmed, she'd lock the bathroom doors and cry. The gap between Whitney Houston, the brand, and Whitney, the person, grew wider every day. Her brother Michael would later admit a terrible truth. He'd introduced Whitney to drugs in the early 1980s, before she was even famous. It began as occasional use, a way to cope with the pressure. But after the Soul Train incident, after the criticism and the identity crisis, what had been occasional became frequent. What had been recreational became necessary. By her own later admission, the substance use got heavy after The Bodyguard's success. The woman who just delivered the biggest selling soundtrack in history, who'd spent 14 weeks at #1, who seemed to have everything, was self-medicating daily. She was disappearing into the very success that was supposed to fulfill her. At the same 1989 awards where the boos cut in, she met Bobby Brown. While she stood there being rejected for being too polished, too perfect, Bobby Brown represented everything she wasn't allowed to be. He was raw, sexual, unapologetically black, unapologetically himself. He didn't code switch. He didn't apologize. He was free in all the ways Whitney was imprisoned. Their 1992 wedding shocked everyone. Whitney Houston, America's princess, marrying the bad boy of New Edition? It didn't make sense to the public. But for Whitney, Bobby represented escape. He saw through the image to the real woman underneath, the one who cursed, who laughed too loud, who came from Newark streets before Clive Davis polished her into porcelain. "He was my drug," Whitney would say years later. She meant it literally. Bobby became another form of self-medication, another way to escape the suffocating pressure of being Whitney Houston. Their early years had genuine passion, real love. When their daughter, Bobby Christina, was born in 1993, Whitney thought she'd found her purpose beyond fame. But two people drowning can't save each other. They can only pull each other under faster. Both Whitney and Bobby were using substances heavily. The very thing that brought them together, their shared understanding of fame's weight, became what destroyed them. They enabled each other's worst impulses, validated each other's paranoia, and justified each other's isolation. The honeymoon ended almost immediately. Robin Crawford, still Whitney's assistant and closest friend, noticed Whitney returned from her honeymoon with a cut on her face. Whitney claimed she'd thrown a glass and accidentally cut herself. It was the first visible sign of what would become a pattern of domestic volatility. By the mid-90s, their home became a battlefield. Police were called multiple times. Neighbors reported screaming matches that lasted hours. The fairy tale marriage had become a nightmare, but Whitney couldn't leave. Bobby had become an integral part of her identity, proof that she was still real, still from the streets, still authentic, despite all the polish. The substances that had been Whitney's secret became increasingly difficult to conceal. Her once flawless voice began showing strain. She'd cancel appearances, sometimes minutes before going on. When she did perform, the voice that had been reliable as sunrise would crack, waver, disappear entirely. The instrument that defined her was breaking down. By The Preacher's Wife in 1996, it was an everyday thing. Whitney later admitted about her drug use. "I wasn't happy by that point. I was losing myself." The movie was supposed to be another triumph, a return to her gospel roots. Instead, it marked the point where Whitney stopped pretending she was in control. January 2000 brought a headline from Hawaii. Airport security found marijuana in luggage. The charges were later dropped, yet the image still took a hit. The star, long held up as clean, now carried a public stain. In 2001, at a Michael Jackson tribute concert, she appeared shockingly thin. Cameras did not invent it. Years later, she said the look told the truth. Addiction had taken hold. Then came the interview that became infamous. 2002, Diane Sawyer, primetime television. When Sawyer asked about crack use, Whitney's response entered pop culture history. "Crack is whack." She insisted she made too much money to ever smoke crack, implying her drug of choice was classier. It was denial wrapped in snobbery, and everyone saw through it. In that same interview, Whitney said something that should have been a warning. "This is not fun anymore." She was talking about her career, but she might as well have been talking about her life. The performance of being Whitney Houston had become unbearable. The mask was suffocating her. December 2003 brought the ugliest truth into public view. Police responded to a domestic violence call at Whitney and Bobby's home. When they arrived, Bobby had fled, but Whitney had a visible bruise on her face. Bobby was charged with battery. Whitney appeared at court, still sporting the bruise, telling reporters, "We're still together," while evidence of violence marked her face. Her father John's betrayal cut deepest. In 2002, her father's company sued for $100 million over fees tied to recording deals. She believed others pushed him while he was ill, yet the filing carried his name. He died in 2003, and the case still hung in the air. Grief added to strain. Then came Being Bobby Brown in 2005. The reality show drew ratings and stripped away any shield. Viewers watched chaos in the open. Whitney later said she did it to stand by her husband. Seeing it play back became a mirror she did not want, but needed. Love had been bent by use. The public image was gone. What remained was a woman who needed help. Fame had given access to any room and taken the peace inside all of them. There is a kind of loneliness that crowds cannot fix. The louder the world gets, the smaller the self can feel. She was still young, still beautiful, still famous, and yet more isolated than ever. Headlines kept score. Healing needs quiet. She had very little of it. Sissy Houston had watched her daughter disappear inch by inch. The gospel singer who'd taught Whitney that her voice was God's gift now watched that gift being destroyed. In 2005, Sissy did what mothers do when nothing else works. She went to court. She got an order requiring Whitney to enter treatment. Whitney entered rehab at Crossroads Center in Antigua and finished the program. The island distance gave her space to hear herself again. The decision to leave Bobby came in 2006, after 14 years of mutual destruction. Whitney described the moment she knew it was over. Bobby had taken a photograph from their family portrait and cut her face out of it. The symbolic violence of being erased from her own family picture was too clear to ignore. The final incident came during another fight. Bobby slapped her across the face. Not the first time, but the last time Whitney would accept it. "I wasn't going to be in an unholy matrimony," she said. She packed up Bobby Christina, then 13, and fled to California. The divorce was finalized in 2007, with Whitney gaining sole custody. Freedom from Bobby didn't mean freedom from addiction. The substances had been her coping mechanism long before Bobby, and they remained after him. But Whitney tried. She returned to the studio. She reconnected with Clive Davis. She attempted to rebuild what had been destroyed. In 2009, she released I Look to You. It entered at number 1. The title read like a prayer for strength. The public answered with support. That September, she told Oprah about the locked rooms, the lost days, and the effort to rebuild for her child. Touring in 2010 showed scars. The once effortless voice fought for notes. Reviews hurt. Some dates were canceled. She returned for outpatient rehab in May 2011. Friends said she was trying. Progress came and went in loops. She kept at it. Recovery is not a straight line. It bends, it stalls, it asks for patience that most people do not have. She tried to practice that patience in small steps: sleep, water, rest, short walks, studio time. Some days offered a hint of the old ease, and she smiled for real. Other days closed in fast, and she leaned on faith to get through to morning. February 2012, Grammy Week in Los Angeles. She had just finished Sparkle, her first movie in years, and spoke of it as a fresh start. In the days before the Clive Davis party, people saw her at events looking unsteady. She had been drinking. Those who knew the signs grew worried. On February 11th, at the Beverly Hilton, her assistant found her face down in the bathtub. Paramedics could not bring her back. She was 48. The coroner's report told a familiar story: accidental drowning, with contributing factors of heart disease and chronic drug use. The toxicology report found multiple substances in her system. Her heart, damaged by years of abuse, had likely given out. She'd slipped beneath the water and never surfaced. That night, Clive Davis's party continued downstairs from where Whitney's body lay. Whitney would have wanted the music to go on, Davis told the stunned crowd. The next night's Grammy Awards became a memorial. Jennifer Hudson sang I Will Always Love You while the audience wept. The voice that had defined perfection was silent. The cost did not end there. In 2015, Bobby Christina was found in a bathtub and later died at 22. The echo felt unbearable. A daughter who had seen too much walked into the same silence her mother met. Whitney was laid to rest in Newark, near her father. The church that shaped her held the service. The circle closed where it began. Grief can be heavy or light, but it always asks the same question. What did we miss while we cheered? We loved the sound. We forgot the person. We praised the range. We ignored the pain. That is how a legend can fade while the records still sell. That is how a mother can leave a child even when she never wanted to go. Whitney Houston's story isn't really about drugs or fame or even tragedy. It's about the cost of becoming a symbol instead of staying a person. Every time we demand perfection from our icons, every time we reject them for being too much this or not enough that, we're writing another verse of the same song that killed Whitney. She sang greatest love of all to millions while unable to love herself at all. She united America with her voice while being torn apart by America's demands. She achieved everything a singer could achieve and lost everything a human being needs to survive. The saddest part isn't how Whitney died. It's how she lived, in the space between who she was and who we needed her to be. That space, that gap between the performance and the person, became an abyss that swallowed not just Whitney, but her daughter too. We call them stars because they burn bright and distant, beautiful to watch, but ultimately alone in the dark. Whitney Houston burned brighter than almost anyone. But stars aren't meant to be people, and people aren't meant to be stars. The price of that confusion is always the same, whether paid in a Beverly Hilton bathtub or a Georgia home 3 years later. The voice we celebrate could have stayed in Newark churches, singing for God and community, living a human life. Instead, it became property of the world, and the world used it up until nothing remained but recordings and regret. That's not a cautionary tale, that's an indictment. Whitney Houston gave us her voice. We took everything else.